2 weeks ago, Treasury Secretary Mnuchin, U.S. Trade Rep Lighthizer, Larry Kudlow, Peter Navarro, and I spent 2 days in China. It was an interesting week, 30 hours on the plane and 30 hours of negotiating. I don't know which was more tiring. We negotiated with a delegation of senior Chinese leaders from its various ministries and led by Vice Premier Liu He. Before landing in China, we sent them an extremely detailed list of our needs, and they responded with a similarly detailed, but as you can imagine, quite different list of their proposals. The gap remains wide. As has been announced, China's Vice Premier will soon come to Washington to follow up on those discussions. It's difficult to handicap the outcome, but my hope is that the strong personal relationship between President Trump and President Xi will facilitate an agreement, just as it seems possibly to be doing relative to North Korea. One sure thing is that the president meticulously honors his campaign promises, and key among them is making our trade relations with China much more fair. Some pundits have said this activity on trade will result in retaliation and undo the benefits of deregulation and the tax cuts. That is an exaggeration. If China retaliates with a 25% tariff on $50 billion of our exports, as threatened, we would lose a major fraction of that volume, but not all. For the sake of argument, assume that we did lose all of that volume. The hit would be $50 billion, a big number, and this would be painful to the direct targets, but it would have less than a 0.3% impact on our $18 trillion economy, less than 0.3%. And it would be partly offset by the reduced imports of the goods on which we had imposed our original 25% tariffs. Some portion of those would be produced domestically. Also, the President has directed the Agriculture Department to use all of its power to ameliorate the impact on farmers. The inflationary effects would be even more muted. Replacing $50 billion of Chinese imports with either our own production or imports from elsewhere would likely cost a lot less than the tariff percentage. But let's pretend that we had to absorb the full 25% of the tariffs, $12.5 billion. This is even more of a rounding error, 71 thousandths of 1%, well within the margin for error of any economic forecast. And following the same logic, it would take $180 billion of tit for tat to cause a 1 percentage point reduction in GDP. However, this is far more than the total of $130 billion in goods that we export to them. Any tariffing on goods amounting to more than $130 would have no effect because we don't sell it to them right now. Also, some of the food and lots of the technical products would not be readily replaceable. Therefore, there is no real-world circumstance where China could cut our GDP by that much. We simply don't export enough to them for that to be able to happen. Now, at the $180 billion level, which is $50 billion more than our total exports to them, the maximum inflationary impact would be $45 billion, or 1/4% of our economy. Given the various offsets, the actual impact on inflation of retaliation would be even less than that. Instead, China could easily reduce our trade deficit by purchasing from us a larger percentage of their existing 1.5 trillion of imports. A 10% diversion of imports that they make already from other parties to us would almost double our total sales to them. To do so, they might have to get around their own trade barriers, both tariff and non-tariff.